Oh, you should just change your major into English. Because they beat them.
Oh ya,
Oke.
siap, siap. Iya. Emang sih
Nanti ada aba-abanya kan? Kelihatan. Visual atau audio? Oke, oke. Oke.
makanya saya alih profesi juga, Pak Ari, saya alih profesi di psikologi.
Okay, so we'll start in less than 1 minute. The operator is going to give me a cue, but there will be a bumper first on YouTube, which we will not be able to. Semuanya selamat menjelang sore dan selamat pagi untuk yang berada di Paris dan Stockholm dan mungkin selamat malam atau waktu yang lain jika menonton ini di YouTube di seluruh dunia. Good afternoon, good morning. It is an honor and privilege for me to have been to be here at the Jakarta International Literary Festival, which has of which the opening was last night, and there are a series of events which, of course, everyone would be able to see on the Jakarta Arts Council website, the series of events and the writers that are participating in this event. And it is especially an honor for me and a privilege to serve as a moderator for this session, the second Authors Forum, where we are here graced by the presence of two writers, namely Bernice Chowli, born in Penang, in Georgetown, Penang, Malaysia, and now residing in Stockholm, Sweden. And the other writers is Rio Johan, born in Batu Raja, South Sumatra, Indonesia, and now residing in Paris, France. And last night, in the official opening of this event of the Jakarta International Literary Festival, the executive director Avianti Arman, as well as the director general of culture of the Ministry of Education, Culture, and Research, Dr. Himal Farid, as well as the curators of this event, Professor Manaka Budiman and Grace Sambo and Mario Lawi, established that literature and the city are inherently linked to each other, constantly and continuously in conversation with each other. Although sometimes they complement each other, and other times they contradict and oppose each other. Yet there is also an assumption that the city is tied to a particular locale and a physical site. But towards the end of the opening night, we had a keynote speech by Professor Abidin Kusno from York University, Canada, who also brought up the issue which ushered us to think of how we have traveled and migrated from the idea based on the earliest extant memory of the fortress city of Uruk the in the epic of Hammurabi Gilgamesh for such cities, and then we have moved to such cities as Jakarta and perhaps also New York, Georgetown, Penang, created out of a multicultural sites, created out of the presence of colonialism in our human history. And Professor Kusno also introduced to us the idea of the global information, the global network of cities created by the informational technology, creating something that we might be able to identify as the informational super city, transcending, going beyond national borders and geographical localities. Oh yes, I'm sorry. I was supposed to. So we have here a translator, Bimo, who will translate what I've been saying and also what the speakers are saying into either Bahasa Indonesia or English. Go ahead, Bima.
Iya, terima kasih Pak Ari. Jadi selamat sore semua, selamat pagi juga untuk yang telah bergabung dari kita di belahan dunia lainnya. Anda juga bisa terhubung dengan kita melalui website. Merupakan kehormatan bagi saya untuk bisa jadi moderator untuk Authors Forum yang kedua, di mana kita juga sudah menerima kedatangan dua penulis di sini. Yang pertama adalah Bernice Charlie yang lahir di Georgetown, Penang dan sekarang tinggal di Stockholm, dan juga Mas Rio Johan yang lahir di Batu Raja, Sumatera Selatan dan sekarang tinggal di Paris. Jadi malam tadi acara ini sudah resmi dibuka, dan pada acara pembukaan tersebut Executive Director Arianti Arman dan Direktur Dirjen dari Kementerian Pendidikan dan Riset Arianti Arman dan Farid juga menetapkan bahwa ada keterkaitan antara kesusastraan dan kota yang terkait satu sama lain dan secara konstan dan secara berkelanjutan terlibat dalam percakapan dan juga saling melengkapi satu sama lain, namun juga saling mengkontradiksi satu sama lain. Namun ada asumsi bahwa kota itu terkait dengan lokal dan tempat fisik. Namun ketika kita sampai ke keynote speech oleh Profesor Abidin Kusno, kita diajak untuk berpikir bagaimana kita sudah tiba di sini bermigrasi dari tempat seperti di Uruk, kota Uruk, ke kota-kota seperti Jakarta, kemudian New York dan juga Georgetown, dan dengan banyak sekali multikultural dan juga dan akhirnya kita bisa memikirkan kita sudah membentuk satu jaringan kota baru, yaitu Super City dengan informasi, seperti itu Pak.
Now we will have the opportunity to hear presentations by the two authors about how each of them have about their writerly experiences traveling and migrating from and to different textual as well as geographical sites, and how such movements have shaped themselves individually as people, as persons, as well as their writing. Now I'll start by welcoming Bernice Charlie to the screen, so I'm just going to have Bernice deliver her presentation. Go ahead, Bernice. But wait for Bimo to translate.
Jadi sebelum
Okay,
kita,
alright.
excuse me Bernice, so kita akan mendengar dua penulis ini bagaimana kedua penulis ini telah melakukan perjalanan pindah dari satu tempat geografis ke tempat lain dan bagaimana perpindahan itu pergerakan itu membentuk baik diri mereka ataupun cara mereka menulis. Nah, sekarang saya akan beri kesempatan untuk Bernice untuk memulai presentasi beliau.
Okay, selamat siang. Thank you so much for inviting me to this. It's a real honor.
Terima kasih.
Okay, so
excuse me, I will translate your. Terima kasih atas keundangannya hari ini, merupakan kehormatan bagi saya.
Okay, so I wanted to just show a few covers of my books and then go on to the present. So I will start with this cover, which is the memoir called Growing Up with Ghosts. The next slide, please.
Dan saya ingin sebelum menunjukkan presentasi saya ingin menunjukkan buku ini yang berjudul Growing Up with Ghosts.
Yes. So this is a memoir that I lived with for almost 23 years and took about 2 years to write. And it is essentially who I am as a person, someone who is of mixed race, of half Chinese and half Punjabi blood.
Jadi ada memoir yang menceritakan cerita selama 23 tahun dan ini saya tulis selama 2 tahun. Ini adalah pengalaman pribadi saya sebagai orang dari ras campuran, setengah Tiongkok dan setengah Punjabi.
And the next slide is the cover of a collection of short stories called Lost in KL. Because I lived in Kuala Lumpur for almost I would say about 25 years. I studied in Canada, but when I returned to Malaysia, I lived in Kuala Lumpur primarily and became very fascinated with the city of Kuala Lumpur. So this is a collection of short stories called Lost in KL.
Dan ini slide kedua adalah Lost in KL. Ketika saya meninggalkan Kuala Lumpur setelah 25 tahun untuk melanjutkan pendidikan saya, ketika saya kembali, saya tertarik sekali dengan pengalaman-pengalaman saya selama di Malaysia. Jadi ini adalah buku saya, Lost in KL, tersesat di Kuala Lumpur.
And the next cover is, there are 3 collections of poems because I started out as a poet. The next one is Onkalo, which is a Finnish word, which means a cave. And then we have the Book of Sins, which is also written. My work is quite personal, but it's also quite political. So these 3 collections have sort of documented different ages of my life. So Onkalo, Book of Sins, which was written after my mother's death, and then Incantations, Incarcerations, which was published 2 years ago.
Jadi ini adalah cover dari 3 buku tentang kumpulan puisi-puisi karena memang saya memulai karir saya sebagai penulis puisi. Ini adalah buku yang menjelaskan pengalaman-pengalaman pribadi saya dalam berbagai tahapan berbeda dalam hidup saya. Yang pertama Onkalo, ini bercerita setelah saya meninggalnya ibunda saya, kemudian Incantation dan Incarceration.
Great. And if you could maybe look at the final book cover, I believe. I can't really see. If you can go down to once we were there. Yes, that's right. Okay. So this is, yes.
Sorry. Jadi ini adalah cover juga dari novel yang saya tulis Once We Were There.
So this novel is very specifically set in Kuala Lumpur from the years 1998 to 2004, and it documents the Malaysian Reformasi.
Jadi buku ini menjelaskan menceritakan reformasi di Malaysia dan buku ini bercerita dari rentang tahun 1998 sampai 2004.
So this novel is almost like a an encapsulation of what it meant to be in Kuala Lumpur during that time, because I do believe that so much of our history, current history in Malaysia, denies the fact that the Reformasi happened, and I wanted to really write about that time.
Dan novel ini menceritakan cerita-cerita atau sejarah terkini di Malaysia, karena walaupun sejarah terkini di Malaysia itu menentang bahwa reformasi telah terjadi di Malaysia, namun saya ingin menunjukkan bahwa sebaliknya bahwa reformasi pernah terjadi di Malaysia.
And it looks it depicts Kuala Lumpur as a city that has many layers. And the three protagonists who are in this book, the points of view are reflected through the stories of their survival.
Dan novel ini juga menggambarkan Kuala Lumpur dalam berbagai lapisan-lapisan. Dan tiga tokoh protagonis di dalam novel ini juga merefleksikan cerita mereka melalui cara mereka bertahan hidup.
It was a very difficult novel to write because as someone who was situated in Kuala Lumpur, I wanted to portray the city in all forms. So looking at the really dark side of Kuala Lumpur, the underbelly of Kuala Lumpur, looking from the point of view of a transsexual sex worker to someone who lives in a very different world. So I wanted to try and portray that. So it has a lot of different layers to understanding Kuala Lumpur as a city.
Dan buku ini sangat sulit untuk ditulis ya, karena ini juga berusaha untuk menggambarkan Kuala Lumpur dalam berbagai lapisan-lapisan, dan saya ingin menjelaskan Kuala Lumpur dari berbagai sudut, termasuk sisi-sisi gelap Kuala Lumpur, tempat-tempat gelap di Kuala Lumpur, termasuk juga pekerja seksual transgender di sana juga, dan bagaimana orang yang menjalani hidup di dunia yang begitu berbeda.
And because I was writing about very, pointed issues about Malaysian politics, I had difficulties finding a publisher in Malaysia and had to look abroad.
Dan karena saya menulis tema yang sangat kontroversial di Malaysia, sulit bagi saya untuk menemukan publisher, penerbit buku yang mau menerbitkan buku saya.
But this novel is really my love letter to Kuala Lumpur, which I think is one of the most fascinating cities on the planet. And I think capturing this time, of the Malaysian Reformasi to 2004 is my way of telling a story about a city that I love and hate.
Jadi ini adalah sebetulnya novel ini merupakan surat cinta saya terhadap Kuala Lumpur, dan saya begitu terpukau dengan reformasi Malaysia yang terjadi tahun 2004. Ini adalah cara saya menunjukkan cinta saya ke kota yang saya cintai dan tempat saya hidup.
So that's a very brief description about once we were there and the city of Kuala Lumpur. If we could maybe move to the next slide.
Nah, itu adalah pengantar dari novel yang bercerita tentang Kuala Lumpur. Kita lanjut ke slide berikutnya.
I can't really see what's on the screen, so.
It's the present, the city, and the capital of Scandinavia.
Yes. Does it have a map on it? Yeah?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So before the pandemic hit, I was without any work, and a friend of mine asked me if I wanted to work on a project that was going to be it was kind of a project that was going to make me feel like a real nerd. And I said, yes, of course.
Dan ketika pandemi saya tidak ada kerjaan, kemudian saya ditawarkan pekerjaan oleh teman saya, mau nggak kerja di proyek yang bisa membuat kamu betul-betul seperti seorang kutu buku. Langsung saya bilang iya.
So I started working with a video game company that is set in Stockholm on a AAA game. So I'm not sure if any of you are gamers here, but I've now been working on this project for 2.5 years, and we're building a game. So AAA means a really big big game, which has a Hollywood film budget. So we were looking at, millions and millions of dollars. And in October last year, I was relocated to Stockholm to work in the office of the company that is now building this video game.
Jadi saya bekerja di perusahaan pembuat video game. Kalau misalnya ada di antara Anda semua di sini yang suka memainkan video game, ini gamenya ini masuk kategori triple A. Triple A ini artinya ini video game yang budgetnya besar sekali, jutaan-jutaan dolar seperti film Hollywood. Jadi Oktober kemarin saya pindah ke Stockholm untuk fokus membuat video game ini.
And this map that you see behind you is actually a map that my father had when he came to Stockholm in 1960. So I feel like I am now here in a place and time that is so different, but I am also here when he was here. So it's almost like there are echoes of his footsteps in this city.
Jadi ini peta yang Anda lihat di sini ini merupakan peta yang dibuat oleh ayah saya di tahun 1960. Dan saya merasa ketika saya hadir di kota ini, walaupun saya hadir di tempat dan waktu yang berbeda, saya seperti mengikuti jejak langkah beliau.
And if you can move to the next photo. So this is a view of Stockholm from right outside my balcony. And as you can see, it's very beautiful. If you can move to the next slide as well.
Nah, itu juga pemandangan Stockholm dari balkon saya indah sekali, dan ini juga pemandangan Stockholm.
So this is a view from a hill that is on the island of Södermalm, which is where I live, and this view is of the city from a distance.
Nah, ini adalah pemandangan kota dari jauh, dari Gamla stan dan Östermalm. Ini adalah pemandangan kota Stockholm dari jarak jauh.
So this is a new city that I have come to embrace and love because it is very, very beautiful, but there are very, very huge cultural changes which I've had to make and understand since I've been here.
Jadi ini kota baru bagi saya yang harus saya rangkul dan saya cintai. Namun memang banyak sekali perbedaan budaya yang harus saya hadapi ketika saya pindah ke sini.
So the way I manage to keep myself sane and to connect with the city is through the next two pictures.
Jadi ini slide berikutnya adalah cara bagi saya untuk tetap waras dan bagaimana saya terhubung dengan kota ini. Next picture.
So the forest, so Sweden is covered 75% by forests, and the name that Swedes use is called Allemansrätten, and this is the freedom to roam. So you can go anywhere in the country, you can go anywhere, there are no borders, you have access to anywhere in the country.
Jadi ini adalah hutan. Negara Swedia adalah negara yang dikelilingi oleh hutan, dan ada istilah di Swedia, Allemansrätten, itu artinya Anda bebas berpergian menjelajahi kemanapun. Jadi tidak ada batas, Anda bebas menjelajahi berpergian di negara ini.
And this is it's a big contrast to where I've come from in Malaysia, because so much of what we know and the forests are basically, they are borders. There are places that you cannot enter. There are parks. During the lockdown in the pandemic in Malaysia, all 3 parks that were next to where I lived in Kuala Lumpur were closed. So to come here and to be able to feel that you have access to go into any forest is a very, very strange concept for me, and something that I really embrace.
Dan ini adalah berbeda ketika saya di Malaysia. Itu yang kita ketahui bahwa hutan itu adalah batasnya. Anda tidak boleh masuk hutan, dan bahkan selama lockdown di Malaysia ada 3 taman di tempat saya tinggal. 3 taman tersebut ditutup, tidak boleh didatangi, tidak boleh diakses. Nah, ketika sampai di Stockholm dan saya bisa mengakses hutan ini merupakan satu konsep aman yang bisa saya hayati penuh, bisa saya anut penuh.
And if you really look at the final picture, this is something that I've learned to embrace. It is wild swimming. And I go into the water even when there's snow. So in this place, you cut a hole in the ice, and I go down in the water in the winter as well. And this is something that I have learned to embrace. And it is as Swedish and Scandinavian as it gets.
Nah, ini adalah kebiasaan yang sangat Swedia sekali, sangat Skandinavia sekali, namun ini adalah kebiasaan baru yang saya sangat sukai, yaitu saya berenang di alam bebas, di alam liar, di mana sebenarnya tidak bisa berenang karena airnya itu danaunya tertutup oleh es. Nah, itu orang itu dipotong esnya, dilubangi, masuk ke dalam lubang dan berenang di situ. Itu sangat Skandinavia sekali.
Yeah, okay, that's the end of my presentation. I can say a few more things if you like, and then we can move to Rio. What would you like me to do?
Itu akhir dari presentasi saya. Saya bisa cerita lebih banyak lagi kalau Anda tertarik, atau kita bisa membahas yang lain. Silahkan.
Okay, thank you so much, Bernice, for such an interesting and quite entertaining presentation. We'll have Q&A sessions in which the audience members can pose questions or comments. So we have learned from you of your, let's say, writing career, starting with the memoir and having to trying to make sense out of, or trying to give meaning to your being of mixed race, and then because of education you moved to KL, which is one reason for which one would travel to another city or move to another city. And you have also commented a lot of your following works are also set in KL, particularly once we were there, and what happened in between 1998 and 2004 with the Malaysian Reformasi, which the mainstream discourse denies. And you have also mentioned how there's layered narration which allows you to present the situation from different perspectives. And I think that would be sort of like appropriate for layered narration would be appropriate for a narrative about a city in which, of course, there are many layers. Perhaps you would like to translate.
Terima kasih Pak Ari. Jadi tadi perspektif presentasi yang sangat menarik sekali dari Ibu Bernice. Nanti ada sesi tanya jawab di mana para audiens di sini juga bisa mengajukan pertanyaan. Jadi tadi juga Bu Bernice juga menjelaskan pertama-tama menulis memoir itu bagaimana upaya beliau untuk memaknai keberadaan beliau yang berada dari ras campuran, dan kemudian juga ketika melanjutkan pendidikan di KL itu juga merupakan kenapa alasan orang pindah tinggal dari satu kota-kota lain, bekerja juga di Kuala Lumpur dari tahun 1998 sampai 2004, kemudian juga menceritakan ketika cerita tentang reformasi Malaysia yang sebenarnya juga ditolak oleh wacana mainstream, namun juga banyak sekali perspektif tadi juga menjelaskan tadi durasi layer tingkatan-tingkatan juga, dan bagaimana pentingnya durasi layer ini dalam proses menceritakan narasi.
Yeah. Then so you have also mentioned how well, the title of your book it shows how being in a strange place is being lost, and that's, I think, a good part of traveling and migrating and enjoying being lost. And even if you're living, I guess, in a city that you've been living in for quite a while, you still can be lost in the layeredness, the stratification, the multiple segmentations of the place. And you also mentioned how difficult it is to find a publisher for once we were there. And I think that brings up a topic that was brought up in the first author session. It was brought up by an audience member who asked how an artist uh, has to deal with um, uh, uh, their artistic endeavor, and then how to deal with artistic endeavor, and how to deal with the corporate world. In this case, the publisher, and how you had to come to terms with that. And but you say also that it is a love letter to KL, which a city which you love and hate at the same time, which is always any kind of romantic relationship is, I think, involves those two emotions. You wanna?
Iya, oke. Tadi juga ada menjelaskan judul buku Anda yang menuliskan menyertakan kata lost atau tersesat, yaitu ini adalah pengalaman, memang sebuah pengalaman yang selalu akrab ketika orang pindah ke tempat baru atau migrasi ke tempat baru, tersesat, bahkan walaupun kita sudah tinggal lama di sebuah tempat, terkadang memang kita bisa tersesat di lapisan tertentu atau segmen tertentu pada kota tersebut. Anda juga tadi menjelaskan sulitnya untuk mendapatkan penerbit untuk novel Anda. Waktu sesi kita pertama tadi, ada yang audiens juga menanyakan bahwa sebagai seniman itu tantangan bagi seniman itu adalah bagaimana menghadapi dunia industri atau dunia korporat. Anda tadi juga menjelaskan bahwa Anda bisa mencari jalan tengah untuk bisa menghadapi dunia korporat, dan Anda juga menjelaskan bahwa Anda memiliki hubungan cinta dan benci, love and hate relationship, dan ini adalah sebuah hubungan yang selalu ada dalam hubungan romantis dan hubungan emosi lainnya.
And the final part of your presentation, Bernice, Bernice's presentation is interesting because then she moved. She was invited to work on a video game company. And in a way, those of you who are gamers will realize that layered narratives is like a big part of video games. And I think later on, maybe we can ask Bernice to elaborate more on how the idea of layered narratives is how it operates within a video game company. So as well as and also she. Being in Stockholm also had something to do with her relationship with her father, who made the map, if I'm not mistaken. And so it's almost like the father has drawn the map for her daughter to go to use when she comes to this place. And she also talks about the availability of the forest in which she can roam and explore without borders, which is very literary, very aesthetic, literary endeavor, exploring. And that becomes a contrast with the various borders that she had to go through, not only not only in the pandemic, but all her life, with all these borders, with all these boundaries and definitions being, even for her to admit that, to define herself as of mixed race, that means there's already a definition about races, being Chinese or being Punjabi or being mixed and whatnot, or being from Penang and living in KL and so on. And then she also talks about how exciting it is to have a new habit, a new custom, a new tradition that she can be involved in. And I think we can later on explore more, or have Bernice elaborate more on these ideas of explorations, of dealing with boundaries in the process of her travels, textually as well as geographically. Go ahead.
Jadi dari presentasi Ibu Bernice tadi dibilang kalau beliau diajak untuk terlibat dalam pembuatan video game. Bagi Anda yang bermain video game pasti tahu di sini bahwa naratif berlapis itu adalah bagian yang sangat penting dari permainan video game. Nanti kita bisa tanya ke Bernice tentang apa itu naratif berlapis, dan tadi juga menjelaskan tadi ke Stockholm, terus melihat peta yang sudah dibuat oleh ayah beliau, dan itu seakan-akan seperti sang ayah itu membuat peta sengaja khusus untuk digunakan oleh putrinya kelak. Dan tadi juga menjelaskan tentang hutan dan keterkaitan antara hutan, batasan, borders, dan exploring. Exploring atau penjelajahan itu merupakan kata kunci yang sangat penting juga sebagai penulis. Berbeda dengan kata-kata penting yang sebelumnya harus dihadapi oleh Bernice, seperti batasan, borders, atau boundaries. Semua itu definisinya sudah pasti, sudah mantap. Seperti ras itu sudah pasti ada keturunan Tiongkok, Punjabi, kemudian sebagai orang dari keturunan campuran itu pasti merupakan hal yang tersendiri tinggal di Penang. Dan kemudian tadi juga menjelajahi Bernice cerita tentang kebiasaan barunya, kemudian tradisi barunya itu, kemudian beliau nanti kita tanya lagi tentang Bernice, tentang penjelajahan beliau, bagaimana penjelajahan melampaui batasan, boundaries, baik secara tekstual maupun secara geografis.
Okay, so now we'll give the screen or the microphone, or it's very difficult in these hybrid situations. You know, what do you give, like the screen or the floor, or I didn't really understand, you know, giving the floor in the first place. So I think now giving the screen and the microphone is easier to understand. So thank God for, or any other higher power to for this new technology. So now I'm just going to have Rio Johan present his presentation and see what kind of insight that we may get from his migrations and travels.
Jadi kita akan itu memberikan waktu dan tempat ya. Biasanya memberikan floor, tapi nggak mungkin juga floor diberikan ya. Jadi ini memberikan layar dan mikrofon ke Mas Rio supaya Mas Rio bisa memberikan kita insight tentang bagaimana pengalaman migrasi beliau.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon. Is it visible, my screen, my presentation?
Is it up yet?
Sudah ada.
Okay, there it's there. There you go.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Selamat sore. Yeah. I'll just start with my first slide, the 3 books. These are my 3 first books published in Indonesia.
Ya, jadi
The first,
mulai dengan slide pertama saya, ini ada 3 buku yang sudah dipublikasikan di Indonesia.
The first one, my first book is the one in the middle, the blue one. It's called Aksara Amananuna, or the Alphabet of Amananuna. It's a short story collection. It was published in 2014. And it was published when I was still in Solo studying chemical engineering there. Yeah.
Jadi ini buku pertama saya yang tengah, Aksara Amananuna. Ini adalah buku yang dipublikasikan di Solo tahun 2014. Waktu itu saya masih kuliah teknik kimia.
Yeah. The black one, Ibu Susu. I wrote it when I was in Berlin. I was there for a residency program funded by the Indonesian National Book Committee. What is funny about this book is that I was in Berlin to write something, but instead of writing about Berlin or anything German, I wrote a tale set in ancient Egypt instead.
Jadi ini Ibu Susu ini adalah buku saya kedua. Waktu itu saya tulis di Berlin. Waktu itu saya kuliah S2 ya. Waktu itu disponsori oleh Komite Buku Nasional Indonesia, mungkin tadi sebutnya. Jadi
no, it was not. Itu bukan S2, itu program residensi buat penulis.
Oh, residensi untuk penulis ya. Jadi alih-alih menulis buku mengenai Berlin, saya menulis buku mengenai ini, Ibu Susu ini. Ya.
Yeah, and the third one was buanglah hajat pada tempatnya, or I think you can translate it to dump your business in the right place or something like that. It was published in 2020, yeah, when I was already in Paris, and it's a funny book. It's a playful and cheeky book, a naughty book, kind of. It's a novel. It's a futuristic novel set, a post-apocalyptic novel set in a world where there's only one toilet left, and people have to stand in a long line for pooing, something like that.
Ini buku Buanglah Hajat di Tempatnya ini dipublikasi tahun 2020 waktu sudah di Paris. Ini buku yang lucu dan sedikit nakal juga dan sedikit jorok. Ini bercerita tentang masa depan di era post apokaliptik setelah perang, di mana di seluruh dunia cuma ada satu toilet dan semua orang tuh harus antri untuk mereka bisa buang hajat, bergiliran buang hajat.
Yeah, it's sedikit jorok. I agree with that. And yeah, next one. These are my two latest books. The first one is my fourth book, Rekayasa Buah. I think it's Fruit Engineering is in English. It's a short story collection, again set in the future, kind of. All the short stories in the book are about silly, stupid, but kind of fantastical fruits. Yeah. So it's only thought that everything is about fruit. That's it.
Ini cerita itu Rekayasa Buah ini cerita kumpulan cerita pendek ya Mas ya. Ini cerita pendek yang settingnya itu di masa depan. Ini tentang jenis-jenis buah-buahan yang mungkin lucu ya dan agak agak fantasi seperti itu Mas ya.
Yeah, and the next one, the latest one, Caravanserai, is a short novel or a novella set in around 15th century Persia.
Dan ini ada Caravanserai. Ini ada novel pendek yang mengambil setting di abad ke-15 di Persia, seperti itu.
Yeah, and I also translated. I've translated two works from French to Indonesian. The first one is from Marcel Schwab, Le Livre de Monel. I think the Book of Monel in English. And the last one that I've translated is three short stories from Giorgio Rousseau. Cerita Cinta Milord Edward Bomson ya.
Nah ini ada buku-buku yang sudah diterjemahkan dari bahasa Prancis ke bahasa Indonesia. Buku tentang Monel yang pertama dari Marcel Schwab dan juga Cerita Cinta Milord Edward Bomstone.
Yeah, so I guess some of you might already guess it that in most of my works I prefer to escape first rather than write reality as it is. I prefer to as a writer, I prefer to escape, and then if I want to say something, then I'm going to say it through escapism itself. When I was a kid, I like to escape through my books, through readings, through fairy tales that I read. I was born and raised in a very small town, but Raja is a very small town. There were not many things to see there. When I grew up there, we didn't even have a mall in that's how small it is. And yeah, so books, fairy tales, and literature were means to escape from it, to imagine many different kind of worlds, imagine many different kind of cities, or even things that doesn't exist, places that's fantastical places. So yeah.
Dan kalau Anda lihat dari karya-karya saya itu biasanya karya-karya saya temanya adalah lari dari kenyataan ya, escapism. Karena saya juga suka membaca sebagai cara dari saya untuk lari. Saya suka fairy tales juga, buku, dan juga karena saya juga lahir di Batu Raja, di kota kecil, tidak ada yang bisa dilihat di sana. Tidak ada, bahkan tidak mall di sana. Itu menunjukkan betapa kecilnya Batu Raja, sehingga untuk saya bisa melarikan diri atau escape, saya selalu baca buku, fairy tales atau kesusastraan, dan saya juga ini selalu mengandalkan imajinasi saya juga untuk bisa membayangkan kota-kota fantasi atau kota-kota yang tidak ada di dalam kenyataan.
Yeah, so based on that, I mean, having rooted in tales, escapism, since I was a kid, most of my works are either fairy tales, allegorical tales, absurd comedies, stuff like that. So when my first book got published in Indonesia, I got several criticism from fellow young writers, friends in Solo, like why there's no stories about Indonesia in my book? Why don't you write things about Indonesia or things around you? Yeah, I realized that I have not written anything about my hometown, for example, or how I grew up or something like that. But as I said before, I feel better as a writer as creating works by means of escapism first rather than facing reality as rough as it is. So.
Nah, itu menurut saya dasar dari semua karya saya, akar dari karya saya, yaitu kisah-kisah fiktif yang sifatnya tales dan escapism, seperti fairy tales, alegori maupun komedi. Waktu buku pertama saya dirilis di Indonesia, saya mendapatkan kritik dari penulis-penulis lainnya. Mereka bilang, kok tidak ada Indonesianya, kenapa kamu tidak bisa menceritakan Indonesia? Saya sadar itu, dan saya memang akui, saya merasa lebih baik ketika saya bisa menciptakan escapism, cerita yang membuat saya bisa lari dari dunia sebenarnya.
And now that I'm not in my hometown or my home country anymore, well, funny enough, I still find myself escaping. I don't really write. I tried one or twice to write about the reality around me, the new home around me, but it's not as satisfying as writing the other stuff. So yeah, I still find myself writing tales, comedies, absurd comedies. I mean, allegorical things, parables. So yeah, one might say that in the surface, there's no difference really, like from the things that I wrote when I was in Indonesia and the things that I wrote here.
Ya, bahkan walaupun saya tidak di Indonesia lagi, saya tidak di hometown saya lagi, tidak di Batu Raja lagi, tetap saja saya tulisan saya tentang escapism. Saya memang pernah menulis tentang realitas, tapi tidak terlalu memuaskan bagi saya. Jadi tidak ada saya bedanya, saya berada di sini maupun saya di Indonesia, saya tetap saja suka menulis cerita-cerita tentang tales, cerita komedi atau parabel seperti itu.
But there are differences though. I mean, being here in a place that is far away from my hometown. When I was a kid, I used to read European tales like the Red Shoes or things that happen in Europe. And now I'm in a place where I used to imagine. And despite that, there were tales. Well, there's a bit of difference. For example, in my third book, Buanglah Hajat pada Tempatnya, it's a story within story kind of book. So in the first story in the novel is called Cerita Tentang Putri Raja yang Kejatuhan Tinja, or the story of a princess who was drenched with doo-doo, or she got poop on her head. Basically, the princess. The story is I got the idea of the story when I visited a fortress in Italy, for example. It's called Fortezza di Bardi. And the idea of someone pooping on the head of the princess first came in mind when I walked through the fortress. I found like holes, I don't know how it's called, like on the wall of the fortress. And back then in the medieval time, people used these holes to throw like hot tar, for example, for people who invade. So and yeah, so why not have someone poop in through these holes, and while he poops, well, a princess will sleepwalk, and yeah, there you go, the poops got into her head. So yeah.
Jadi ini I'm gonna have to ask you this. Jadi lubangnya buat apa tadi?
Okay, let me. I got what he was saying. So in medieval di abad pertengahan, asal tahu aja sampai abad ke-18 itu semewah apapun gedungnya nggak ada toiletnya. Tetapi ada lubang-lubang untuk menuangkan misalnya air panas atau wax lilin. Kalau misalnya atau oil gitu ya, hot oil, kalau ada yang menerobos masuk gitu. Jadi kalau ada musuh masuk ke bentengnya, itu dituangin ke situ gitu buat ini. Jadi terus Rio kepikiran gimana kalau bukan senjata gitu, senjata biologis tapi ya, senjata biologis. Senjata biologis gimana kalau aja ke dalam lubang itu gitu, terus jatuh ke kepala putri, terusnya nya hilang gitu kan, selesai urusannya gitu kan, ya kan udah nggak ada lagi gitu. Jadi kurang lebih begitu.
Ya, makasih.
Ini mungkin saya sama Rio ada dalam frekuensi yang sama dalam hal ketidakwarasan gitu, jadi agak mudah nyambungnya.
It's exactly like that. So yeah, well, what I wanted to say is like there's a difference like visiting places in real and got inspired by it than just imagining it like when I was in Indonesia. So despite that, the actual finished story has nothing to do with the playlist. Another example is a short story that I wrote when I was in Paris. It's called, well, it's not really easy to translate the title, but it's basically two towers on two hills towering at the same height. It's an allegorical short story about two nobles who decide to build instead of continuing the war. They decide to compete by building towers, one tower for each, and the one with the tallest tower would win and eventually be the ruler of the land. And this idea came in mind when I visited this place. It's called La Tour César. It's in Provence. It's 1 hour from Paris. And when I just asked, when I like a true tourist walk around the tower, I read in the tower that an explanation that they built the tower in such a on the top of the hill because, well, of course it's also for defense, but it's also because they want to show the power that the ruler is towering over the city of the people, something like that. So yeah, and from the idea I developed the idea into the short story. So yeah.
Jadi saya mendapatkan ide-ide saya waktu saya berkunjung ke kota-kota tertentu. Intinya adalah beda rasanya kalau berkunjung langsung ke kotanya asli, mendatangi kota asli dibandingkan hanya membayangkannya saja waktu saya di Indonesia. Contohnya biasanya saya waktu itu berkunjung ke Latun Sesa ini tempat 1 jam dari Paris. Saya berkunjung ke menara tua di sana dan di situ saya mendapatkan inspirasi cerita pendek tentang bagaimana ada 2 kesatria yang alih-alih mereka berkelahi atau bertarung, mereka kemudian berkompetisi siapa yang bisa membangun menara di atas bukit, dan menara siapa yang paling tinggi itu adalah menjadi pemenangnya. Ini juga salah satu simbol juga siapa orang bisa membangun menara yang tinggi yang bisa mencakup melihat kota secara keseluruhan. Seperti itu.
And like the last example is my fourth book, Fruit Engineering, is the fruit. I call it the fruit book. Yeah, and it's a comical short story collection, as I said before, about fantastical futuristic fruits. And the idea of writing whole book mainly about fruits, silly story about fruits, is that when I first arrived in Berlin, that was my first time in Europe, and I went to KaDeWe, Kaufhaus des Wassers. So it's a mall, a big mall in Berlin. And then I saw from like for the first time in my life some like fruits that I've only managed to.
Oke. Ini sepertinya ada gangguan.
You froze for a
I've
while.
never.
Yeah.
What?
You mentioned a story about you being in a big mall in Berlin.
Yeah. And they sell story. They sell well. There are a lot of fruits that I've never seen before because that was my first time in Europe. Basically, I've I've only seen them on TV, but never in real. So yeah, I felt like wow, these fruits are exotic. I've never seen I don't know, like blackberries before. Well, there are no blackberries in Batu Raja. Maybe in Jakarta, but in Batu Raja it's too small for blackberries. I've never seen. I have never seen. I don't know, a red currant, black currant, even like exotic fruits from Africa, from Latin America. So yeah, I felt like, oh, I want to try this fruit. I want to try this fruit. I want to try this fruit, and I felt like these fruits are exotic. And then I had some discussions with my German friends, and they said, no, these fruits are not exotic. Fruits from your place are more exotic. Um, Pineapples are more exotic, or mangoes, and so yeah. So from that experience, I got the idea to write. Why not writing a whole book about fruits?
Ini juga contoh lainnya adalah membuat satu buku penuh isinya tentang buah-buahan, buah-buah fantasi. Ini terinspirasi dari waktu saya pertama kali ke Eropa itu di Berlin. Pertama kali itu adalah kota Berlin, datang ke mall besar, itu banyak buah-buahan di sana, buah-buahan yang belum pernah saya lihat sebelumnya di Batu Raja, seperti blackcurrant atau blackberry itu mungkin di Jakarta ada, tapi di Batu Raja itu tidak ada. Jadi karena saya itu nyoba-nyoba semua buah-buahan eksotis ini, terus bilang sama teman saya orang Jerman, dia bilang ini bukan buah-buahan eksotis, yang buah-buahan eksotis itu adalah nanas, seperti itu. Jadi saya dari inspirasi mencoba-coba banyak buah-buahan ini saya menulis buku.
Sounds so childish, but yeah, but that's the kind of thing I write. Then back to the home country versus new home. Well, yeah, on the surface, there are not many differences between the stories that I wrote when I was still in Indonesia and the stories that I wrote here when it comes to style and the type of stories. But I mean, at least personally for me, I feel there's a bit of difference there. Well, it's not bit. There's a quite big of difference writing it because I'm in a new place. I see new things. I experience new things. Even I visited places that used to be foreign for me, used to be exotic. That's right, things that used to be different and exotic for me. So yeah, and I think that gives me kind of new way of seeing things when I write, even though in the end it's still tales, allegorical tales, and escapism.
Jadi kalau misalnya bedanya apa di Indonesia sama di tempat baru saya ini? Kalau dari cerita tidak banyak berbeda ya, dari gaya cerita, jenis cerita tidak banyak berbeda. Yang mungkin membedakan adalah kalau di sini saya kan banyak melihat hal-hal baru, banyak ke tempat-tempat yang asing dan eksotis. Namun ini memberikan saya cara berpikir yang baru. Namun temanya, gaya bercerita saya tetap sama, yaitu escapism.
And then back to the question that people always throw me when I was in Indonesia. Well, at least some people. I don't. Should I write only about Indonesia? Should I write only about the reality around me? Like, I mean, the reality as it is. Well, now that I'm here, I would say I don't think so, because there have been so many writers like Jules Verne, for example, who writes about things that he hasn't experienced in real life. I mean, no one has been no, well, I mean, you don't have to go to Venus or to write a story about an alien coming from Venus, for example, or from, I don't know, other part of the space of the universe. You don't have to experience living in Mesopotamia back in the day to write about Mesopotamia. So yeah, but then again, I mean, um, is it really? I mean, is when I said escapism, does it mean that I'm 100% escaping when I write things? And I would say no, because as much and as far I escape through my writings, I realize the more that I escape, the more that I look back on my writings, the more that I realize that there are things from my reality here and there, bits of my reality here and there in my escapism writings. There are always things from my experience, either back home in Indonesia, from my hometown, or my new experience here in Paris. So yeah, all I want to say is like, yes, I write escapism, but and even though even though if I want to say something about my reality or things around me, I prefer to say it through escapism, if that makes any sense. And that's the end of my
Iya.
presentation.
Jadi menjawab segelintir orang yang berkata di Indonesia, mengapa tidak menulis tentang Indonesia, mengenai realitas Indonesia. Namun kan seperti yang saya katakan, tidak perlu tinggal di Venice untuk menulis cerita tentang alien di Venice. Tidak perlu tinggal di Mesopotamia zaman dulu untuk bisa menceritakan tentang Mesopotamia. Jadi memang tema saya memang escapisme, namun tidak 100% escapisme. Karena semakin saya menulis, semakin saya sadar bahwa ternyata saya menyertakan realitas-realitas dalam hidup saya, baik pengalaman saya di kampung halaman saya maupun pengalaman saya di Paris. Jadi benar saya escapism tema saya, namun saya tetap menyertakan realitas hidup saya.
Okay, thank you, Rio, for that interesting presentation. So basically, Rio also is commenting on how different he is from Bernice. One foot going in the direction of escapism, that's him, and the other one more embedded in reality. That's supposed to be Bernice. Yet Bernice is working with a video game company, so maybe she's also going that direction, toward gravitating towards where Rio is. And so Rio has traveled in different ways. He's written a book set in ancient Egypt, and then going to the future, speculating about what ancient Egypt was like, what the future is like, which is, of course, that which is also a kind of exploration, which I think Bernice talks about when she finds the excitement and the possibilities afforded by the availability of the borderless forests where you can just roam. And I think Rio has been doing this in his writing, roaming history or non-history or pseudo-history, the various different versions of history. And he's also translated, so he's also traveled in that way, right? Traveling from one language to another. And I think the question which Rio raises is also very important. I don't know if people from other generation remember the Cranberries, but they had an album entitled "If Everybody Else Is Doing It, Why Can't We?" So if if European writers can write about non-European surroundings, so why can't Rio, an Indonesian writer, write about non-Indonesian realities or non-realities or alternative realities? So yes, thank you so much. So we still have time for discussions, but before that, the translation.
Yeah, that album, what? Cranberries album?
The Cranberries album.
Cranberries.
Everybody else is doing it, so why can't we?
I'm old enough to know the name.
You are old enough. But I don't know about Rio though.
Ya, buat Rio. Jadi tadi presentasi Mas Rio itu menjelaskan perbedaannya tentang Mas Rio dengan Bu Bernice ya. Kalau Mas Rio tadi temanya escapism, namun kalau Bu Bernice tadi lebih ke realitas. Namun tadi juga Bu Bernice cerita kalau misalnya lagi bikin video game nih mungkin akan lebih berat ke escapism dibanding realitas. Tadi juga Rio menjelaskan tentang bagaimana menulis tentang perjalanan ke Mesir atau masa depan, dan tadi juga melihat bagaimana cerita di Mesir dan di masa depan, dari eksplorasi dari Bernice tadi mengenai kemungkinan dan menariknya hutan yang tidak berbatas, yang tidak memiliki batasan, di mana-mana bisa berjalan, melihat sejarah, non sejarah, pseudo history mungkin. Jadi bisa tadi dengan Rio juga menerjemahkan, tadi kan berarti itu menjelajahi satu bahasa ke bahasa lain. Kalau di album dulu ada album band namanya Cranberries ya, If Everyone Does It Why Can't We?
Ya kalau cukup tua untuk
Jadi kalau misalnya penulis-penulis Eropa tuh bisa menulis cita-cita non Eropa, kenapa penulis Indonesia menciptakan cita-cita yang non Indonesia seperti itu?
Yeah, then it, and also Rio's explorations with fruit, I think, it has the similar kind of excitement as Bernice's narrative about ice swimming. What was it called? Wild swimming, ice swimming.
Yeah, wild swimming.
Wild swimming. So I think that
yes.
the fruit book is almost like a wild swimming book. He swims in exotic fruits, which is, I think, very important, because then it has something to do with exploring the kind of exoticism that Western writers have done. You know, exoticizing. You can't translate that with my confusion. About Asia and Africa and other places of the world, and of course Rio is sort of like it's reverse exotification, where he exoticizes regular fruit according to Europeans, like grapes, I think, boring fruits.
Ya, jadi eksplorasi buah ini itu juga sama saja seperti tadi yang dijelaskan oleh Bernice, wild swimming atau berenang di alam bebas tadi ya. Ini berenang di buah-buahan eksotis, menjelajahi eksotisme. Seperti penulis Eropa menjelajahi eksotisme Asia atau Afrika. Nah, yang Rio lawannya adalah berbalikannya. Jadi menjelajahi hal-hal yang tidak dianggap eksotis di Eropa, buah-buahan yang tidak eksotis di Eropa, namun Rio mengeksplorasi eksotisme dari buah-buahan tersebut.
Okay, so now we have time for questions. Okay, speculative fiction nerd we have in the audience. I know this person. So we have a nerd, which that links with Bernice, and he's a gamer that links with Bernice also, and he's an escapist, which links with Rio. So we have one question. Are there any more hands to be raised to ask questions? Okay, we'll start with. I'm going to pretend that I don't know him, so I'm just going to ask his name and what city he comes from, and then ask the question.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Rio and Bernice. I'm Sandia. I'm from Jatinangor, Sumedang, a bit far from Jakarta. I have a question for both Rio and Bernice. I think I'm going to start with Rio first. But fun fact, the first fruit I looked for in a supermarket when I was abroad for the first time were actually the cranberries. Right, now here's the questions. For you, I guess. I mean, I think I can call myself a speculative fiction enthusiast. So the question, I think, the question and sub questions I have in mind right now is that uh, as a writer of as a writer who writes escapist fiction and also allegorical fiction, which I think is a very interesting paradox. Like the combination of both is an interesting paradox. My question is my first sub question is, um, do you have um, like a set of speculative fiction writers that do you think that influence you in writing your stories? Because of course we took a look and we heard about your experience, but not the people whose writing preceded you and influenced you. And also my second and last sub question is, how, like, because I always think that people in Indonesia uh, always have this like preconceived notions about how science fiction and fantasy should look like. So they might think that your stories may not be part of that notion. Um, so I was thinking, like, do you ever think that you're part of the community? Do you think you're part of the larger speculative fiction or science fiction and fantasy community? I'm using the term speculative fiction because I think it's much more inclusive and all encompassing here. And my question for Bernice always has something to do with me being a gamer, and it's like in the past couple of years, it's been very refreshing to see like AAA games being like more inclusive and more diverse, including a lot of people like us, basically. So yeah, my question is actually quite straightforward. Like how does your cultural background and your experience with diversity influence your work in the video game industry as a cultural consultant? Because I think this is like the position that I think is one of the most important positions right now in video game development, especially in when we talk about bigger games, especially AAA games. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sandy. Are there any more hands raised? So I think before you translate,
translated.
huh?
Ya, butuh diterjemahin ya. Jadi pertanyaan pertama, apakah ada penulis speculative fiction lainnya sebelum Rio yang mempengaruhi karya-karya Rio? Terus pertanyaan nomor 2 kan orang sudah punya gambaran mengenai apa ya, spekulatif fiction itu seperti apa ya. Jadi apakah mereka berpendapat bahwa yang di karya Rio itu bukan bagian dari yang mereka gambarkan dari komunitas speculative fiction ini. Dan kemudian untuk Bernie juga apakah sekarang game AAA itu banyak yang lebih beragam, lebih inklusif lagi, bagaimana latar belakang kultur atau budaya Bernice itu bisa berkontribusi dalam pekerjaan Bernice sebagai konsultan untuk pembuatan game-game ini.
Okay, and the next question from the gentleman in the back.
Okay. Good afternoon, Bernice and Rio. It's honor to meet you too. I'm gonna stick to the question first to Bernice. You mentioned that the difference in culture when you in Kuala Lumpur and Stockholm. I want to know what is the most different aspect in culture that affect you as a personal and as a writer. And for Rio, I really interest to the one of your works, Buang Sampah Pada Tempatnya. The idea is really out of
Buang hajat.
Buang hajat, okay. Buang hajat ke tempatnya, it's really out of the box I want to ask a classical question. How's your writing process when you write that novel? Thank you very much.
I'm sorry, what was your name again?
Oh yeah, okay. My name is Rizky and I
Rizky.
live in East Jakarta.
Okay. East Jakarta, not Bekasi. East Jakarta.
Jakarta. Rizky dari Jaktim tadi menanyakan proses ketika tinggal di Kuala Lumpur dan Stockholm, bagaimana perbedaan budaya di dua tempat itu berdampak pada Bernie secara pribadi dan sebagai penulis. Kemudian ingin tahu proses menulis untuk buang hajat pada tempatnya ke Mas Rio.
Okay, so now we're going to just ask, I think, starting with Bernice, I think you can address both Sandia's as well as Rizky's questions, because I think in a way they're related.
They're sort of related, yeah. Okay. Yes, terima kasih for both questions. The first one, it's a really good question. So the game that we're working on is a AAA game that is set in Southeast Asia in the 1970s. So it's a very, very specific time period. We have a fictional country in Southeast Asia, and because I have been hired as a senior writer and a cultural consultant, my job is to help with the world building, with representation, with the different cultures and races that are in the game. And as you know or may not, game dev is absolute chaos. It is the hardest job I've ever done in my life. It's like trying to write a novel with, 35 different people, but there's 150 people working on our game right now in Stockholm and in New York, and I'm the only Southeast Asian creative on the project. So it's a huge responsibility. It's a lot of fun. And I feel that, this transition from the literary world to video games is going to happen to more writers in the future, because games need writers, and you need to create worlds that exist in a space that is so driven by technology. So it's a really challenging job. And we're at a point now where we're still trying to figure so much out with the core mechanic of the game, but my job is to create a sense of authenticity and believability in a world that is fictional in Southeast Asia in the 1970s.
Oke. Jadi pertanyaan bagus karena memang game yang disebutkan, video game ini itu bercerita di negara fiksi di negara Asia Tenggara di tahun 1970-an. Jadi sebagai penulis senior, saya harus membangun dunia sendiri dengan budayanya sendiri, dengan rasnya sendiri. Katanya ini adalah pekerjaan tersulit yang pernah saya lakukan seumur hidup saya. Ini seperti menulis cerita dengan 35 orang berbeda. Jadi ada yang di Stockholm juga, ada yang di New York juga. Dan sebagai orang satu-satunya perwakilan dari negara Asia Tenggara, ini tanggung jawab yang luar biasa bagi saya. Dan nanti sepertinya seiring dengan waktu akan banyak transisi penulis-penulis yang akan masuk dunia video game. Karena dunia video game adalah dunia yang sangat terdorong teknologi, namun butuh penulis-penulis yang bisa membangun dunia di dalam video game tersebut. Jadi ini adalah kerja keras bagaimana saya bisa membuat dunia yang otentik dan dunia yang meyakinkan kalau dunia itu bisa benar nyata, yaitu dunia negara fiktif di Asia Tenggara di tahun 70-an.
And to answer the second question, I've traveled a lot in my life. I've been to many different parts of the world, including Europe, Eastern Europe, Western Europe. But the Nordics are very, very specific. I think the Nordic countries are known for being a little bit individualistic. So Sweden is a country that celebrates individualism. It's the power of the individual. And there's, you have to rely pretty much completely on your own. The construct and the concept of what a family is very different from what we understand in Southeast Asia. So that is the biggest difference, is that you have to be completely self-reliant. And I may be criticized for saying this, but I think Stockholm especially is a city that celebrates loneliness. And it's a very, it's a concept that I'm still grappling with. And it's very much a Nordic thing. So these are the huge contrasts and the huge changes that I have to embrace right now, because I am rooted here. I'm trying to embrace what it means to live in a Scandinavian country. It is not easy, but these challenges are also giving me a sense of a different kind of reality. I think my writing will change because I'm spending so much time in the forest, and I'm also now exploring the realms of the physical world and a spiritual world.
Jadi memang tantangannya banyak sekali di sini. Realitas ini mengarah ke realitas tulisan saya juga berubah karena saya menghabiskan lebih banyak waktu di hutan. Jadi banyak tulisan saya itu ada di dimensi fisik dan ada di dimensi spiritual juga. Saya sudah berkeliling ke banyak negara di seluruh dunia, Eropa, Eropa Barat, Eropa Timur. Namun negara-negara Nordik ini terkenal sangat individualistis karena nilai-nilai individualistisnya, terutama di Swedia. Seperti konsep keluarga di sini beda sekali dengan konsep keluarga, konstruk keluarga yang di Asia Tenggara. Di sini saya harus mengandalkan diri saya sendiri. Dan di sini di Stockholm, di Sweden itu mereka merayakan kesepian. Jadi kesepian itu adalah sesuatu yang dirayakan. Ini adalah konsep yang sangat kontras dengan kehidupan saya sehari-hari, dan ini saya harus membiasakan diri dengan konsep merayakan kesepian ini.
Okay, so we're almost going to be running out of time. I'm just going to ask apologies to the organizers because we're going to go over time. But we're going to ask now Rio to respond to the two questions, well, the three questions, I think, which maybe will probably take time. So go ahead, Rio.
For the first one, well, I never really limit myself or to read only allegorical tales or as a reader. I mean, when I was a kid, I really the first book that I finished. I mean, the first thick book that I finished was The Chronicle of Narnia. That was when I was in. I don't remember which book. There are like 6 books of it, but I don't remember which one it is. But yeah, well, it's not really that thick, but. And then the first serious literature that I read was Lolita, and I think that was the book that made me want to write too. I was in high school or middle school at the time. But when it comes to, I also read Dostoevsky and Kafka, and yeah, I know that these are not really speculative fiction writers, but I think as a writer you should take, as a writer you have to read many different kind of things, in not only fiction and even historical book or anything, and takes inspiration from them, even though they're not really the kind of things that you want to write. You'll always have to take inspiration from everything. And when it comes specifically to speculative fictions, I really like the works of Stanislav Lem. He's a Polish science fiction writers. Maybe some of you have seen Andrei Tarkovsky film Solaris. It was based on his novel. And I also really like a Russian or Soviet writers called I'm sorry if I cannot really pronounce his name, Sigismund Kirzizanovsky. Yes, it's a very complicated name, but yeah, I found his books are playful. These two writers, they write playful things. They write science fictions, but they pay attention to how they write it, the language, the use of language, the playfulness. I love, that's what I love about them. I also like, I don't know if people will consider his works as speculative fiction or not, but I love the works of Italo Calvino. There's a book called Cosmic Comics by Italo Calvino. It's kind of science fictionist for me, but well, some people might say it's not really science fiction. It's more like absurd tales. Yeah, well, those are some of I still have some. There are still some names that I like, but there are 3 names that I really like when it comes to speculative fiction. And the second question, I never really, when I write something, I never start writing with mind or with a goal that I'm going to write this certain genre, or I'm going to write because I want to write. I want to say this. I never start my story with a message or with a genre. Um, I started with an idea or with a premise, and wherever and then I develop it. That's just it. If it becomes if the idea becomes futuristic tale, then it becomes futuristic tale. If the ideas become a stupid comedy, absurd comedy, then it becomes absurd comedy. If it's become something set in Mesopotamia, then it's set in Mesopotamia. I just develop it in the best possible way that I could think of. So I never really think of genre or message. If there's any messages in the end, and then there's some messages that I can put. For me, the idea and the story is the most important thing. And if the reader would say, "Oh, this is a science fiction," then I'm gonna be very happy to hear that, of course. And but if there's if another reader would say, "No, this is not science fiction," and I wouldn't mind either. I mean, I will just let the reader think whether it is science fiction or not, whether it is speculative fiction or not, whether it is fantasy or not. Of course, I'm going to embrace it if people say, "Oh yeah, this is science fiction or fantasy." But in the end, I'll just leave it to the readers whether it is part of it or not. And the last one is I assume that is the question is related to whether it is comfortable for me. Like, is this? I mean, did I felt disgusting when I write this novel, which is basically all about poop? Is almost 400 pages, filled with poops and all kind of words related to poops. Well, it's not really for me as the writer. I don't really feel disturbed or disgusted because I'm the one. Well, I write it, so I already anticipated it when I started to write. But I know that is because I read some reviews and stuff. I read some people are disgusted or felt like disturbed. So yeah, I think it's more disturbing for the readers than me as a writer because yeah, I already anticipated it.
Oke, saya akan terjemahkan ya sebagai pembaca. Saya tidak membatasi diri saya membaca dongeng alegori. Waktu anak saya membaca Chronicle of Narnia, itu buku tebal pertama yang saya baca. Kemudian karya sastra yang saya baca itu Lolita. Saya juga baca karya Stoici, Kafka juga. Namun sebagai penulis, sepertinya Anda tidak bisa membatasi buku Anda. Anda harus banyak membaca buku fiksi, buku sejarah, sehingga Anda bisa terinspirasi oleh karya-karya itu. Untuk fiksi spekulasi, I'm gonna ask your Andrei Starkov, itu nama-nama yang disebutkan tadi.
The only one I can recognize is Italo Calvino Cosmic Comics because I read that over and over again. The other one, I don't think even Rio can pronounce it, so that's okay. I think.
And the first name, can you repeat
Well,
the first name?
the Polish one is called Stanislav Lem.
Stanislav Lem.
And the Russian one is Sigismund Kirzizanowski.
Okay. So you might want to take a note karena nggak bisa dibaca juga saya. Terus yang pertanyaan tadi, proses menulis tidak ada tujuannya. Biasanya saya memulai itu tidak tidak ada pesannya, menentukan pesannya apa atau genrenya apa. Saya mulai dengan premis dulu, ide dulu. Nah kemudian kita lihat berkembangnya kemana. Apakah berkembang itu dongeng futuristik atau kemudian komedi konyol atau dongeng di Mesopotamia, itu nanti berkembangnya ke arah situ. Jadi nanti saya baru nanti kalau misalnya ada pesan atau genrenya itu baru terakhirnya. Kalau misalnya pembaca bilang, oh ini science fiction, ya saya tidak keberatan. Kalau pembaca bilang ini bukan science fiction, saya juga tidak keberatan. Mengenai nyaman atau tidak, atau menjijikan atau tidak, itu buku Buang Hajat Tempat-Tempatnya itu 400 halaman, isinya penuh dengan hajat, penuh dengan tinja semua. Jadi saya tidak merasa jijik dan terganggu, ya terserah pembacanya gimana. Pembacanya merasa jijik atau terganggu dengan membaca novel saya tersebut.
Okay, so I think we've gone over time, but thank you, Bernice, thank you, Rio, for such an interesting and entertaining and eye-opening, actually, presentation and talk. Clearly, their travels seems to invite us to travel also. Jadi, so I'm just going to let him rest. Jadi memang sepertinya perjalanan mereka juga mengundang kita untuk melakukan perjalanan. Yang jelas saya akan ingin membaca karya-karya Rio. Rizky udah pasti pengen buang hajat, maksudnya baca novel yang buang hajat pada tempatnya. Kemudian saya juga jadi tertarik untuk membaca karya-karya Bernice karena terus terang saya agak deg-degan waktu jadi moderator untuk dua penulis yang karya-karyanya saya tidak pernah baca, itu agak irresponsible sebenarnya. Tetapi ini saya sangat senang karena saya bisa tergugah untuk my interests are ignited in to read the works of these two amazing writers, and tentunya Sandia akan menunggu kapan itu game akan release because he's going to subscribe. I think he's into Southeast Asian speculative fiction and games, and therefore I think it's like the Book of Revelation. What you just said to Sandia, akan ada game latar Asia Tenggara dan udah itu dia harus nabung. Oke, jadi terima kasih teman-teman sekalian, baik yang menonton di YouTube maupun yang ada di ruangan ini. Terima kasih atas hadirannya. Mari kita beri tepuk tangan, applause, a big round of applause for these two amazing writers. Dan jangan lupa bahwa masih banyak acara lagi yang terkait dengan Jakarta International Literary Festival. Malam ini juga akan ada reading night yang kedua itu untung ada orang-orang di sekitar saya. Yang kedua, dan silahkan tetap tinggal di daerah sini agak berkelana karena banyak yang bisa disaksikan dan dialami selama beberapa hari ke depan. Terima kasih, selamat sore dan selamat siang untuk yang ada di Paris.
Terima kasih. Thank you so much.
Terima kasih.